Welcome to the first of a special two-part series on youth and gambling. This episode will focus on the nature and appeal of gambling to young people, while the second part will be about how parents can influence their children to gamble. But before we jump into it, let's set the stage by first talking about what we mean when we say gambling. The word gambling usually brings up images of men with slick back hair standing over a craps table surrounded by beautiful women. When we think about it in this way, we are referring to what's known as commercial gambling, or gambling at a venue like a casino or a club. However, gambling can exist outside of the commercial domain and really just means that you are staking something of value for the hope of winning something of more value, keeping in mind that you can also lose your valuable item, which nobody likes to think about. So, why am I saying all of this? Well, the topic for today's episode is around youth. So when we think about gambling and youth together, we usually think, well, those gambling venues have those big scary looking bouncers, so there's no way that anybody under the age of 18 will ever get into them. This usually leads to the conclusion that gambling isn't relevant for youth, and it's really an adult issue. So, going back to my definition, gambling doesn't have to be in a commercial venue, and the fact that you can stake anything of value means that it doesn't just have to be money. To give you a good example, let's go back to my childhood. My earliest memories of gambling were actually in kindergarten. The items of value were playing cards and marbles. My friends and I would stack our precious trading cards against the wall in the schoolyard and flick cards to knock them down. Although I, nor anybody else around at the time, thought of this as gambling, I was playing with the intention of winning my friends' cards, and there was a real possibility that I could lose my own cards in the process. There are countless other occasions that I could think of during my school years when I gambled with other items of value, but the one thing I can't remember is who taught me how to gamble. This leads me to believe that gambling is really something that is inherent in humans. We aren't taught it, but we do instinctively integrate it into a lot of activities. And why do we do this? Well, I think the answer is quite simple. Gambling makes everything more fun. Have you ever tried playing a game of poker without staking something, even if it's a few dollars? It's boring. You need something or anything to give you an emotional investment. You need to care about the outcome, otherwise, what's the point? So, if gambling is part of who we are as a species, then we shouldn't turn our backs and say, my child would never be interested in gambling. The fact is, they're probably already doing it. We just call it something else. Plus, if we gamble because it makes everything more fun, then children and teenagers are the most likely to gamble because all they want to do is have fun. If something is off limits to them, then that makes it even more exciting. At this point, I want to pause and make sure something is really clear. Gambling shouldn't be considered evil or a bad thing to do. It's just a mechanism to make games more interesting. Furthermore, just because people may add gambling elements to their games, it doesn't mean that this will evolve into anything that is harmful. When I say harmful, I'm referring to something that we call heavy gambling. Yeah, the term could probably do with some work, but in a way it's accurate as it represents a style of gambling where somebody is spending way more time and money than they had originally intended. It also falls into the realm of commercial gambling, where you aren't just trading money back and forth between friends, but trading it with a commercial entity which exists to make money. A more common term for this style of gambling is problem gambling, but I think that this term is too subjective. It assumes that a person who is gambling in this way must have a problem, when the reality is they often don't see it this way. I also want to highlight that somebody doesn't just start gambling in a heavy manner. They build to this over a period of months or years. Now, a summary of what we've covered so far. Gambling is when you stake something of value in the hope of winning something of greater value, with the possibility of losing your stake. Gambling can't exist in of itself, but is a mechanism that is added to activities or games to make them more interesting or fun. This makes it particularly attractive to children or adolescents, as they want to maximize their fun and love to take risks. There is a style of gambling called heavy gambling, where someone will spend more money or time than they intended. However, people don't just decide to gamble like this. This play style develops over time. Since the focus of this episode is on youth, you might be thinking, well, how is the notion of heavy gambling relevant, as it takes time to develop, so it's unlikely that youth will be experiencing it? Well, for the majority of people that I've seen with a heavy gambling style, they started gambling when they were in their teens or early 20s. That is why it's relevant. Furthermore, during their youth, they experienced quite a significant event which we call the positive first experience. This set the stage for a future heavy gambling style and deserves its own episode to really appreciate it. Well, that's all we have time for this episode. In part 2 of this series, we'll explore the impact that families can have on youth gambling and go into a bit more detail on the whole positive first experience thing. If you want to find out more about anything we spoke about in this episode, feel free to get in touch with us. Bye!